Bom dia a todos. In this presentation, I will share results about an evaluation of tree seed systems in 4 Asian countries. Our findings show that seed supply needs investments if restoration targets are to be met. India, Indonesia, Malaysia and the Philippines together have pledged to restore over 47 million hectares of degraded lands in the next decade. So these countries need tree seed in tens of billions to be able to achieve these goals, and the emphasis is on native species and agroforestry species. But like in many other countries of the world, the seed supply system for such species is not yet well developed. And so this then makes it very difficult to reach these ambitious targets in time without compromising the quality of seeds and restoration success. In the study that I will present, we carried out surveys and interviews among restoration practitioners and stakeholders to assess the readiness of seed supply systems to support these restoration targets in these 4 countries that I mentioned. Some of the most common problems regarding seed quality in restorations are unsuitable or unknown provenances, choosing seed sources that are degraded or fragmented, and so too small to produce genetically viable seed, and also collecting seed from very few trees from these selected sources. And these practices then together result in poorly adapted or inbred seed and in genetic bottlenecks that then reduce the productivity and resilience of these restored forests. In South and Southeast Asian countries where we carried out this study, the rapid loss of natural seed sources is a particularly burning issue because human population densities in these countries are extremely high, and so there are a lot of competing land use and demands. So, of course, forest loss and degradation make it important to restore degraded habitats, but it also makes it so much harder to carry out restoration because these few remaining natural seed sources are disappearing. Personally, what maybe bothers me the most in terms of these ambitious restoration targets that are to be achieved in very little time is the overall lack of seed delivery systems for native tree seed. Most projects in those countries across the tropics where we have been working on, they collect seed by themselves and they collect it from the nearest natural forest that happens to be left in the target landscape. There are no designated seed sources, there are no quality standards, and there is very little involvement of local actors who could actually benefit from job and income opportunities from these restoration efforts. So it is difficult to see how restoration could be rapidly scaled without addressing these issues and without developing more effective and more integrated seed supply systems. Overall, the quality of seed has significant impacts on project delivery. So practitioners report that they have to change the species that they had initially chosen, or that they have to restore smaller areas than they were planning, and they are facing delays in implementation, and costs are increasing, and a lot of other related issues. So, although we tend to think that these issues related to seed availability are basically technical questions and the kind of issues that projects could solve on their own, they actually have huge implications on what kind of forests get restored and what kind of ecosystems are delivered from these forest areas as a result. To assess the status of seed supply systems for forest and landscape restoration in these 4 study countries, we used a new indicator system which was developed and tested in several Latin American countries, unfortunately not including Brazil. The indicator system includes 5 components. So these are selection and innovation, seed harvesting and production, market access, supply and demand, quality control, and the enabling environment. And there are in total 15 indicators under these 5 themes. So the indicator system helps us to assess what are the strengths and weaknesses of pre-seed supply systems at national levels, and it could also be used at subnational levels where relevant. So for this study, we carried out an online survey and interviews with experts in each country, and also, of course, literature review and document analysis, so that we could arrive at these indicator scorings that I will show you now. You can see here the rankings by country for the 15 indicators divided by the 5 main themes. So each different shade of green is a different indicator theme. And we can see from this graph that maybe with the exception of Indonesia, the seed supply systems are not yet well developed in these countries, and that there are issues actually in many aspects of the seed supply systems, so from selection and innovation all the way to enabling environment. The indicator scores are overall quite low. There were 3 main issues that were common among most of these countries, or some cases all of them. So first of all, there seems to be quite a big mismatch between supply and demand of seed for native species. I mentioned that there are national restoration plans and commitments in place in all of these countries, and these commitments have stimulated use of native species in restoration. However, seed sources and delivery systems are still commonly lacking. And so, for example, in the Philippines, only about a couple of % of those trees that were planted as part of the national greening program were actually native species. Secondly, there is lack of research on the impact of climate change on species. And this is significant because these countries, many of them are including a lot of islands, so they are already experiencing severe impacts of climate change, for example, more frequent and intense cyclones and floods and droughts. And so these kind of changes will have impacts on what kind of species can survive and where. There are, of course, individual studies on climate vulnerability of different species, but what is generally lacking is the translation of these results from research to kind of practical guidelines or advice for restoration practitioners, so that they could make more informed choices about what species and what provenances to use and where, so as to help these restored forests to be resilient into the future. And lastly, quality control mechanisms for germplasm are lacking or are mostly only applied to exotic plantation species. This is the case in Indonesia. And this is something that undermines restoration practitioners' trust in the germplasm that is available in markets. So the practitioners that we interviewed as part of this study reported that the lack of information about seed quality is the most common reason why they would prefer to collect seed on their own rather than to buy it from markets. So this is one of the issues that would need to be addressed, this trust deficit, if we intend to scale restoration and help develop more integrated seed supply systems and supply networks. So overall, what we can see from the results is that, I forgot one thing. So I wanted to say that, quality control is obviously important, but what is also important is that when we are introducing it, it's done in such a way that it doesn't push informal seed suppliers, such as smallholders and self-help groups, out of the market. So when regulations are introduced, they should also be accompanied with capacity development for such local actors, so that they can, in a way, compete on a more level playing field in terms of seed supply. Okay, so in conclusion, what we can see from the results of this study is that the seed supply systems in these 4 countries currently do not match the restoration targets that have been set. And so we are left basically with 2 choices, either to reduce the ambition level of the targets in terms of the areas that the countries want to restore, or the timeline for this process, or to radically step up investments in seed supply. So investing in seed source protection, seed production, and delivery systems, if these original targets are to be maintained. I would like to conclude with a few examples of how these issues in seed supply could be tackled. So firstly, to help match seed demand and supply, we recently started a new project in 3 of the 4 study countries, plus Bangladesh. And the idea of this new project is to help identify demand for seed sources, where are seed sources lacking, and also to link seed suppliers with customers in these landscapes where new seed sources are being established. And so to help estimate seed needs, we have divided each country into seed zones, so areas that are relatively homogeneous in terms of environmental conditions and soil characteristics and so on. And so seed can then be transferred within these zones without having to worry about maladaptation. And the idea is then that each seed zone should have then at least one seed source, or ideally more, for each of those target species that are used in restoration in that seed zone. So this approach helps kind of to break down those national targets and help to plan them and operationalize them at more local levels. Secondly, we are developing spatially explicit decision support tools to help restoration practitioners to identify what species are suitable for restoration on their target sites and also meet the land use objectives that they themselves have. This tool takes into account current and future climates and advises restoration practitioners in terms of what species are suitable into the future and where seed can be collected for the target site. This tool is already operational in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, and a number of African countries, and we are in the process of expanding it in several other countries in sub-Saharan Africa and here in Asia. There's also a nice new paper that came out in the Journal of Applied Ecology about the methodology of the tool. Thirdly, we have developed a web application called Seedit that helps seed collectors to document seed sources and collection activities. And so this app collects information about the location of the seed sources that the collectors are visiting, and users can then add information about when collection happened, how much was collected, and add photos and so on. The app does not require internet connection out in the field, so the data will be updated to the cloud afterwards. And so it is this kind of tools that could have potential to support quality assurance in seed collection and generate that trust between suppliers and customers that I mentioned earlier. This tool is already being used in Fiji and in Malaysia, and it's being tested in several other countries. Okay, and last but not least, we are supporting the FAO Forest and Landscape Restoration Mechanism and the Restoration Initiative to improve practitioners' capacities in seed selection and production. And as part of this work, we are just launching a global survey on seed sourcing practices and seed supply networks. So we would really appreciate if you could take the time to have a look at the survey and answer the questions. The survey is available in English and Spanish and French as well, so you can see the links and codes here to access the survey. And based on the results of the survey, we will then develop capacity development materials for practitioners. So please contribute and appreciate if you could also share these links with your colleagues and networks. Here you can see the list of publications that I mentioned during the presentation. Okay, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer to any questions that you might have. You can also reach me at this email address that's shown on the screen. Thank you.